Hey, welcome to the Publish, Promote, Profit podcast with me, Rob Kosberg. Every week, I interview thought leaders and experts who have used a book to grow their income and their impact. So tune in weekly for these interviews so you can learn how to use your own best-selling book and go from hunting for clients and opportunities to instead being the hunted. All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Rob Kosberg here. Have a great guest for you today for our Publish, Promote, Profit podcast. Matthew Turner is a British author who wrote his latest book that he has. Hold it up there, Matthew, for those watching on YouTube. Beyond the Pale. He's written that on the back of interviewing hundreds of successful entrepreneurs, authors, investors, and thought leaders, as well as writing his own books. Matthew ghostwrites articles, books for other successful entrepreneurs and thought leaders in between spending time with his two children. So perhaps not as often as he would like to, because kids, I have three, so I understand the pull there to want to be able to spend time with your children. So Matt, good to have you on the podcast. Look forward to chatting today, my friend.
A real honor and a pleasure to be here, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Very exciting to hold in your hand the fruits of your labor. I know it's going to launch soon, so congratulations for that. Tell us a little bit about the book and tell us about the, kind of foundation, where this came from, where the idea was, and this, we talked obviously just a few moments before, but this joining of the nonfiction and fiction, I'd love to engage on a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Well, here it is in all its glory, Beyond the Pale. And I just said before we started recording, it's crazy to think how this has been a journey now for sort of the last 4 years. And it was the previous book before that what I wrote called The Success Mistake, which was another 4 years in the making. Wow. So even though they're very separate books, for me, it seems like a very sort of continuous journey that has just taken me over the last 8 or 9 years. Right. And just saying that is, it's insane. I can't believe how quickly time has flown. But yes, where did the idea come from? Well, this is my 5th book that I've written under my own name. 3 novels, a nonfiction book, The Success Mistake, which I just mentioned. And then this is a fable, a business fable, which kind of combines the two together. And I've always had this desire, probably for 6 or 7 years now, that one day I would write a book which brought my two passions of fiction and nonfiction together. I got into writing, I just fell in love with creating stories. So fiction is deeply rooted into my sort of passion for writing. It's where my brain just naturally goes. I struggle to just share facts and figures and anything in too much of a dry way. I like to share stories. I like to kind of use that imagination. But I also love nonfiction. I love the elements that it brings into you, helps you, teaches you things. And I particularly love interviewing other people. I interviewed 160 odd of them for The Success Mistake. And I think it's a fantastic way to just learn how other people do something. It's very impactful on you personally. And if you get the story right and share it, it can be really impacting on other people. So I've had this joint love of fiction and nonfiction, but I've always felt like they were two separate entities. But I felt like one day there would be a book, a project, something that would bring the two together. And I'm happy to say it eventually led to Beyond the Pale. And I mentioned to you just before we started recording, I think having a fable like this is quite important, because usually a novel does a very good job of entertaining and allowing you to escape. We often turn to novels to just disconnect from the world a little bit, disconnect from our work. But they don't usually do a great job of educating and or enlightening. Right. Whereas nonfiction usually does a fantastic job of educating and or enlightening. But it usually falls short in the escapism areas and the entertainment areas. I know you get some nonfiction books which are quite entertaining, but too many of them are too dry. Yeah. So for me, a fable is just a beautiful blend. Yeah. It brings in escapism and entertainment, as well as education and or enlightenment. Yeah. And it just allows you to learn in a less forced way. It just allows you to just, I suppose, lose yourself in the story and naturally relate the characters and the situation and the hero's journey to you and your journey and your situation. So one of the books which had a huge influence on me when coming up with the idea of this was The Alchemist, which is a beautiful fable.
Yep.
Beautiful. And it's very much a life-affirming spiritual awakening. It just forces you, whether you like it or not, to just reflect on life. Like capital letters, exclamation mark at the end, like bang. What does life mean to you? And I thought like I could write a book which was less of a spiritual awakening and more of a kind of business awakening, to really force the reader to question what they are doing business for, like why they have built their business, why they are on the journey they are on. Are they too caught up in the hustle? Are they too caught up in another version of success that doesn't mean anything to you, but society's version or their parents' version, or just the continuous influence we get from others as we scroll through social media and we lose sight of our vision? So my hope is that Beyond the Pale stops people in the tracks, as well as entertaining and allowing them to escape and disconnect, also enlightens them and just encourages them to ask, what am I doing all this for? Have I lost sight of what I've built, what I'm building, where I'm going? And I think that's applicable across all generations, especially for today's millennials, slightly older, slightly younger, who's very much caught up in the online world. We have online businesses. Even if we're brick and mortar, we have online businesses. If we're writers, I don't consider myself specifically an entrepreneur. I consider myself a writer, but to be a writer in today's world, like, you are an entrepreneur. So even if you don't have, a huge scalable business, you're probably still involved in this online world, constantly consuming information, comparing yourself to others, connecting with thought leaders, influencers, yada, yada. So it's a book I'm very proud of. It's going to be the first of 3. So it's a trilogy, and I'm excited to see how Ferdinand's character develops over the next couple of years.
Love it. Well, congratulations. You've said a couple of things that have spurred my interest. You've written this book. It's a fable, but you've written this book kind of on the back of hundreds of interviews that you've done with entrepreneurs. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about like your interview style. Are you, whether for the previous book or for this one, are you asking the same questions over and over? Are you looking for something specific? Like, talk to me about how you kind of compiled your data, if you will.
Well, it's been a journey. I think back to when I did my early interviews for the Success Mistake, like I say, it's like 8-9 years ago now, and it was not great. Let's just say I learned through trial and error.
Sure.
And in the beginning, I think I was poor because I did ask the same questions. I was too regimented on like questions, and I turned track. And my approach now in general to interviewing, whether it's doing something like for a program and interviewing people, whether it's something for a book, whether it's going to be recorded or it's just for me, I tend to just create a structure. So the interview will involve certain themes and topics. So for the Success Mistake, for instance, I would always start the interviews in a similar kind of manner. The premise of the book was to learn about the entrepreneur's big mistake or failure, and then what they learned on the back of that, how they developed that into success, and how the life they lead today was built on the back of that. So I didn't have questions per se, but like topics. So it would be like, okay, well, what was the mistake? Take me there, tell the story.
Right. The biggest blunder. So you got to at least know that.
So that was kind of like the topic one. And then I would just let them speak, and the follow-up questions would just become reactive based on it, rather than trying to force a particular sort of journey and particular prompts. And that's probably the word right here. It's just creating prompts to try and just nudge them in the right direction. And then the next big one would be, okay, like, so now we're at the end of that journey. Like, what does life look like now? How does it compare? So it was a very simple structure when interviewing. And I took a similar kind of process into Beyond the Pale. I only interviewed 10 people for Beyond the Pale. Okay. Like I say, it's a novel. It features a fictional character, Ferdinand, and he is an owner of a fictional business. But I interviewed around about 10 people who have personally inspired me on my journey in recent years. And they were kind enough to share some stories and advice as if speaking to Ferdinand, and then allow me to bring their actual character into the book.
Oh, really?
So it's a fictional story, but yeah, it's very much set in the real world that features these real world entrepreneurs like Jordan Harbinger, Sol Orwell, Ishita Gupta, and Kamal Ravikant, people who have had a big influence on my journey. And for that one, it was different because every single interview would focus on a particular topic. So when I spoke to AJ Leon, for instance, I really wanted to just dive into how he left the corporate world and became this kind of nomadic entrepreneur, because that was going to be this sort of segue for Ferdinand leaving, the business Silicon Valley world and just going out there and finding himself. Yeah. So again, I didn't have questions per se, but I just thought, like, what do I want to get out of this? Like, what are the key prompts that I want to give AJ? And then just let the conversation unravel. So every single person I interviewed for the Beyond the Pale, there was like a topic. So one was mindset was a topic. One was based around the relationship between mind, body, and spirit. One was based around our trust with others. And another one was more our trust ourselves, like how to love ourselves. So each person had a kind of an overarching theme. And within that, I would create 3 or 4 prompts. But the rest of it was just letting it unravel. And I would record it, and then on the back of it, go through, make notes, write stuff down, and just start to try and think, okay, well, what can I bring into the chapter in this really natural way? And sometimes there were direct quotes. Sometimes I would alter them a little bit. Sometimes I was just taking the inspiration of the conversation to kind of build out that particular scene. Yeah. With the Success Mistake, it was obviously different because they were like mini case studies rather than, this natural narrative going through. Right. But a similar kind of thing, I would re-listen to the audios, make notes, pick out those key highlights and think, okay, well, what's applicable? What quotes can I bring in? And more importantly, how can I take the inspiration of the interview, the inspiration of the conversation, and bring that to life in a way which is hopefully going to make the reader lean forward a little bit and go, okay, I want to know what happens next. Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I love your commitment to your craft because number one, to do hundreds of interviews for your previous book that's no small matter. And number two, it sounds like you interviewed some amazing people, which leads me to my own curiosity. So how did you get on with Naval Ravikant as an example? Or, how did you have these interviews with some of the people that you named? So Kamal Ravikant was an interesting one. He's someone who, he wrote a book, probably 5 or 6 years ago. Okay. Kamal, is that his brother? Kamal, his brother Kamal, not Naval. No, I don't know about Kamal. It's funnily enough, I'd never come across, and I've dove into Naval's world a little bit since, but I love his stuff. Even though, he's this, and for some reason I never really knew him, and I never pieced it together until like way down the journey. And I was like, I wonder if Kamal's actually Naval's brother. And then I was like, oh yeah. Well, tell me about Kamal, because I know Saul as well, and some of the others that you mentioned. So how'd you connect with him? How did you get those interviews? So I first came across Kamal just from following James Altucher. James Altucher is someone who I've always admired, and I've got a lot of value from reading his books over the years. And had the pleasure to connect with him a few times here and there. I read Kamal's book on the back of it being recommended from him, and I did nothing with it. It was just on my bookshelf for like 2 years. Sometimes I would just get a book because it's like, okay, that sounds good. Yeah. And then you forget about it. Well, I turned to it one day, and it's called Live Your Truth. And it's so short. It's not a novel. It's not nonfiction. It's kind of like a series of journaling type prompts and little mini essays. But it was just beautifully written, very enlightening. And I was just like hooked. And I've read Live Your Truth probably about 5 times since. It's a small book. It's only about 60 pages. Oh, nice. But it's beautiful. And I've read Kamal's other books since. Funnily enough, even though I already had the idea of Beyond the Pale before I even knew, I came across Kamal. He wrote a fable of his own shortly after. And again, beautiful book called Rebirth. So I managed to, through my friend Sol Orwell, hooked me up with Kamal. And I'd also touched base a little bit with Kamal because he was one of those people where he spoke such an incredible book. I just reached out and was like, thank you. This, helped so much. But after a lot of wrangling, I managed to get Kamal on a phone. And yeah, it was a very eye-opening interview. He's rather quirky individual. He's very blunt with his words. He certainly kept me on my toes as an interviewer.
His brother is as well, so
they seem like they certainly come from two pieces from the same pod in that sense. And I was already kind of a bit in awe.
Yeah.
Because he was this writer. I mean, he's much further down the road than I am anyway, but as a writer, he's just got a beautiful, natural way with words. And straight away, he just kind of had me on the back foot. But it was good because it forced me to, and it's funny, it's mentioned in the book, but one of the first questions I asked you was like, bad question. Ask me a different question. It's a broad question. And I was like, okay. And he's like, that's a problem with people. They ask broad questions and expect to get specific answers.
Nice.
But you need to ask specific questions. So he's like, ask a different question.
Yeah.
So I did. And it put me on the back foot, but I've referenced this idea of asking broad questions in the hope of getting specific answers so often. And I think it's a fantastic way to just look at life. Like, we are venturing out into the world, just asking these broad questions every single day.
Yeah.
Just throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something will stick. Hoping that if we just consume all this content, watch all these videos, listen to all these podcasts, that the answer will find us.
Right.
But the trick is to learn what question you need to ask.
Yeah.
And then go out there and ask it. Then you get the answer. And if there was one way of like me summing up Beyond the Pale and what I hope it gives to the reader, it's at the end, I hope it encourages them to figure out what questions they need to ask.
Nice.
So it's so funny.
Yeah.
Because it was just this rather abrupt interview that was wonderful in so many ways, but unlike anything I could have predicted. It was about 11:30 at night, my end.
Wow.
I had about a 6-month-old daughter, so I was just tired. And at the time, I was just like, shook up. Like, how do I get through this interview? I feel like I'm doing it all wrong. But it turned out to be a wonderful interview.
Yeah, it sounds like you got
great nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, you got like the foundation for your book there.
But this like little off-the-cuff remark that probably meant nothing to him,
right?
And he's probably totally forgot about, has had a fundamental impact on not just the book, but my life as a whole. Like this thing of, am I asking a specific question right now? And the answer usually is no.
Love it.
So yeah, Kamal's one of my favorites, and I'm every single person who appears in Beyond the Pale has had an impact on my life in some way.
Yeah.
And I know some better than others, but they're great people and very inspiring.
Love it. You know, you brought up what my next question was, because I was thinking, okay, you've interviewed so many people. Undoubtedly, 3 or 4 stand out for the lessons that interview taught you. You just shared a huge one, obviously. Give me 1 or 2 others that the interview stood out for one reason or another, and you took away like a real gold nugget.
So AJ Leon is another one. I interviewed him for The Success Mistake. Someone else who I kind of came across rather serendipitously on the back of another interview I did for The Success Mistake, and just on the off chance reached out to him. And it was just one of those interviews. It was probably about 7 years ago now.
Wow. And
it just like lit me up. And it was just one of those like pivotal moments in my own sort of career. He's an inspiring guy, is AJ. If anyone hasn't come across his work, check him out. What he does with Mystic Inc. is just great. He's nomadic. He's just passionate, and he's just a good human being who focuses on going a mile deep. And that was the big lesson I took from him. This idea of stop scratching the surface, go a mile deep. And when I interviewed him for the Beyond the Pale, that again it wasn't like I was expecting that to come out of the interview, but during our call, I had the pleasure of like meeting. I've met AJ in person a few times. So I went down to Stratford-upon-Avon, where he spends some of the year, and we were just having probably like a 3 or 4 hour interview over coffee and beers. And at one point he just said, I don't understand how people build businesses these days and have like thousands, millions, sometimes even billions of users. I cannot fathom it. I cannot fathom owning a business where you're serving that many people. you're only ever going to be able to scratch the surface with them. Me, I would rather just work with a few and go a mile deep.
Nice.
And again, it was another little tidbit which he probably just totally forgot about, but it stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, that's the same for me. Like, I am a less is more kind of person. And too often in my life, I've spread myself too thin, said yes in too many different ways, tried to be everything to everyone, as a writer, as a consultant, as a coach, whatever it may be. And it just left me scratching the surface. And from that day on, I've taken a step back and thought, how can I go a mile deep and have a true impact, not just on my own sake and well-being, but how on those I serve at home, family, but customers too, readers, everything else. And that's it. Like, he's a mile deep kind of guy.
Right.
And it was a huge lesson I took. And he's just a beautiful person. And I've had the pleasure of featuring him in both my books now. And he actually wrote the foreword as well for The Success Mistake. So yeah, he's had a big impact. One other person who I didn't interview for The Success Mistake, I came across him after the fact, was Sol Orwell. And he features in pretty much the last chapter of Beyond the Pale. So he comes in at the end. And he was one of the first people I interviewed for Beyond the Pale. And this was way back in 2018, I think. So it's a few years ago now. And during the conversation, again, it was just, this is why I say don't stick with questions, because this was just came on the back of kind of an off the hook follow-up question. It wasn't one of the things which I expected to come out of it. But one of the things which I was asking Sol is he was coming off the back of these successful cookie events.
Yeah.
He's
big chocolate chip cookie guy.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's so funny because if you don't know Sol, he's the guy behind examine.com, which is all about nutrition and diet.
I know.
But he's built this like cult following for being the chocolate chip cookie guy.
Yeah.
And he went through the journey of how he started off just like doing these little random events, and then they grew and they grew and they grew. And he was saying like, oh yeah, I'm doing one soon, but it's probably going to be my last one. And I kind of asked the question, why do you not tempted to like turn it into a brand? And he was like, at me again, like, that's the problem with so many entrepreneurs. They're always trying to monetize things.
Right.
Sometimes you should just do something for the sake of doing it, doing something because you love it, doing something because it has an impact. It doesn't always have to have this monetary goal. Like, obviously, if it's your business and you don't have anything, you need to, but you get to a point where you have enough and you build this side hustle to try and make money. Whereas in actual fact, maybe that side hustle should just be this passion project where there's no expectation, no pressure, and you can just have fun. And so often we have fun with something and then we try to make it into this real thing, and we stop having fun because it becomes like this responsibility. And again, that made it into the book because it was the exact kind of question Ferdinand would ask. Is this typical entrepreneur always trying to monetize ideas, always trying to make more money, always trying to go on to the next thing? But again, never taking a step back, asking why? What is the value here? What is the point? And someone like Sol comes along and says, you don't need to monetize everything. If I tried to monetize this cookie event, it would become a responsibility.
Right.
It would become a job. It would no longer be as fun. The way it is, there's no expectation.
Yeah.
I can just do it if I want, but I don't have to.
Right.
I can bring it back in the future and keep it small, or give everything to charity, or just never do it ever again. And it's all fine because it's just this little passion project.
Yeah.
And again, that was something which opened my eyes personally, not just for the book, but yeah, we're allowed to just have fun as people.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we get to a level where we have enough, and that gives us the freedom, the time to do something fun. Yeah. And it may become something big. And if we want it to become big, we can, but we don't have to. Sure. And just having that choice to take ownership of your life was, it was eye-opening for me. And another little serendipitous, off the cuff comment that he probably does not remember, but sticks with me.
Yeah. No, I love it, man. I love it. I think it's one of the reasons that I love books so much and really try to convey to people, you know, you've gone the extra step, which is far more difficult to have actual conversations with thought leaders, right? That's much more difficult. But you can pick up a thought leader's book and in essence, have a conversation with that thought leader that, I mean, if you just get one amazing golden nugget from it, it could really change the way you think about life. And so love it, love it, love it, love it. Thank you for sharing that. Let's change gears for just a moment and kind of wrap things up. I always like to know, you've written a book, you've written a number of books that are making an impact on, hopefully thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. How have your books led to more of whatever it is you're looking for? More authority, more connections, financial freedom, et cetera. How have your books helped the author, Matt Turner?
Well, it's crazy to think that I'm still very much in the process of making like my writing, like my books, like a full-time thing. I'm not there.
Yeah.
And it's the dream. It's what I'm aspiring to be. But honestly, it was this writing The Success Mistake. I can basically attribute every single penny just about I've earned over the last 5 or 6 years to The Success Mistake.
Wow.
And it largely came down like The Success Mistake really forced me to have a connection first mindset, because I was having to do all this outreach to get 160 odd people to be in the book.
Yeah.
I must have reached out to 1,000, maybe even 1,500 people over a 3 or 4 year period. So I was building a network and I was grabbing these conversations. And I remember the first time I had like a bit of a pre-sale campaign for The Success Mistake, I was too spammy. I was too sales centric. And I got called out on it a few times when bringing these people. In some cases, I'd not spoken to for a couple of years. And it was one of those kind of ego hidden moments for me where it's like, I've gone through all this time and energy to reach out to these people, managed to get them on a call, speak to them, interview them. And now I'm just trying to sell to them. So that just changed the game for me. And I basically spent a few days just building a big spreadsheet. And eventually I put everything into Contactually, which is like a CRM system, to basically set reminders and put different people into different buckets to set reminders of contacting everyone in my network every few months.
Nice.
And these days, a lot of the outreach is done by like my assistant. So I did it for a long time, but it's my assistant now. But then when they reply, I take over the conversation. But a huge part of my life now is just built around continuing to build the network where possible, continuously, at least once a year, doing a bit of an evaluation on that network and be like, okay, who goes in what bucket? How often, when was last time? Like, have we dripped off? Have we kind of moved on? Are we not quite aligned anymore, which is absolutely fine. But just having a very focal point of like, okay, this should be part of my everyday. To be nurturing. And I've been doing this for like 5 or 6 years now, having a kind of nurturing connection first mindset. And bit by bit over time, it has led to opportunity. Sometimes working directly with said connection.
Right.
So there's some people now who I work with who I first connected with probably 7 or 8 years ago, involved in a Success Mistake, and just kept the conversation going. And in time, it led into a ghostwriting gig,
right?
Either books, articles, email streams, whatever it may be. A lot of the times I speak to them and I'll just reach out to them and I'll tell them what I'm going up to. And then they'll introduce me to someone else and they become part of my network. And then they introduce me to someone else and they become part of my network, who introduce me to someone else. And it's like this fourth person then who I end up working with. So just about every person I've worked with over the last few years can be attributed to someone who's featured in The Success Mistake, either directly working with them or these kind of like 4, 5 removals of a friend of a friend of a friend. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think I'd be ghostwriting.
Yeah.
It was just this natural, organic process where I just would have more conversations. And when I would talk about what I'm good at and what I want to be doing, that introduced me to someone who needed an article writing, and then that led to more articles, and that led to guides and reports and entire nurture email sequences, and then eventually a book.
Yeah.
But it can all be just attributed to this connection first mentality. And right now I'm very much in launch mode, and I'm recording daily videos, and I'm just, again, tapping into the network, but trying to ask in a very humane way, and ask in a very kind of nurturing way. And how can I help you too? And I've gift copies of a book and mailed them out to everyone, which I've made sure to be saving up in recent years so I could do this the right way. because I wanted to treat the network right.
With respect.
I didn't always do that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now that I come asking for them around launch, most people aren't going to be going, oh, not you again.
Yeah.
Because most people for the last 2, 3, 4 years have been getting an email from me every few months, just asking how things are.
Yeah.
And we've just had conversations, you're just checking in. And yeah, it's amazing what opportunities arise from there. And if you take the time to nurture your network, you don't usually have to do much asking when you need help.
Yeah.
They're more than happy to give you a hand and then share you with someone else and introduce you to the next. And I truly believe that I will go from strength to strength in terms of authority and thought leadership and all that kind of stuff in the coming years. And I certainly aspire to get to the point where the money I earn is based purely off my books, my programs, with maybe just a little bit of client work here and there. But if I get to that, when I get to that point, it will still be attributed to that network, just being connection first. And yeah, if you have that philosophy, I truly believe good things happen.
Awesome. Awesome. Matt, it's a great way to end. Great advice. Where can we send people to, whether it's to buy Beyond the Pale or just to connect with you in general? What's the best place to do that?
The best place is to go to beyondbook.co. So that's beyondbook.co. Once you get there, you'll be met by like the picture of the mountains there at the top of the thing. That kind of is front and center.
Yeah.
And on there, you can download a free sample of the book to get a feel for whether Beyond the Pale is right for you. It links to the book on Amazon and other stores. And it also links to Instagram, Facebook, and all that good stuff where you can connect with me. And please ask questions, reach out, connect. Let's have a conversation.
Love it. Love it. Brother, great to converse with you. Love your style. Love the way you respect your network. And, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. Cheers.
Same.